Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We're always glad to have this returning guest. Shawn KhunKhun is the CEO of Dolly Varden Silver. He joins us this Thursday, December 1st, 2022. Shawn, thanks for coming back on.
Grateful to be back on. Thanks for having me.
The last time we had you on, we were talking with you about a value opportunity that was presenting itself in not only metals, but in the miners as well, and in mining-related companies such as royalty and streaming companies, etc. Dolly Varden Silver is among those that's been identified by Rick Rule, for one, as being an exceptional, high quality and high value company. It's one that he's invested in and that we're invested in, and a lot of our subscribers know about and are glad to know about. You talked to us about your stake in the company and why you thought that now was a special time of value. Can you give people the big picture from the way that you look at it about whether this is sort of an ultimate value opportunity or certainly one worthy of people taking a close look at it? And there's a viewer's question I'll tie to this from Tracy Norman. Is there going to be a major pullback first quarter? So for people who are trying to decide when to make their big move, what's your personal, what you've been doing and what you believe about the opportunity, the value opportunity present right now?
There's a lot to unpack there, but I guess where I'll start is people that know me well consider me pretty conservative, and so in and around August and September, I was doing something I don't normally do, which I was pounding my fist on the desk saying, "This is an all-in moment." And that, you'll never hear that from me. Like in the 20 years that I've been professionally investing and running companies, I don't think I've actually. There's one time in the spring of 2009 where I felt the same level of conviction. And so, to answer the question, we've seen some silver equities, and we've seen, like, first of all, the metal is up from the August low. It's up maybe 30%. My company has more than doubled from our September low. But to put that into context, into a larger picture, we're trading at 20 cents on the dollar from where we would be in a bull market valuation. So I think there's tremendous upside from here. Is there a pullback coming in Q1? It's possible. The way I would approach it is, if you have no exposure to the space, I would probably put 50% of your where you want to be fully. I'd go 50% weighted here. I'd go half in, and then I'd wait and maybe put another 25% in throughout Q1, and then I'd get fully allocated in the first half of next year. That would be my reasonable approach.
Now, Dolly Varden, you talked to us a couple times before about drill programs to expand the definition of your assets and your resources and the potential of those resources to help define more value. And you've had some results come pouring in, frankly, recently, and there's been multiple press releases that would like you to give us a summary of. What's the big takeaway from your interpretation of the results that you've obtained from your drill programs recently, and what it means about the value that you've defined?
That's a good question. So the way I would answer that is, first of all, we're in a setting where outside of our property, there's been 800 million ounces of silver discovered outside of our property. And in addition to the silver, there's been tens of millions of ounces of gold and lots of other metals like copper as well. Within our property limits, so far, we've outlined 63 million ounces of silver and 1 million ounces of gold. And where I think what we're demonstrating here with recent drill results is stepping outside of those known areas, we're expanding the mineral footprint. And it's giving me the confidence that we could rival one of these great projects that are in the neighborhood, projects like Eskay Creek, Premier, Brucejack, where these projects, some of them have discovered 200, 300, 400 million ounces of silver, tens of millions of ounces of gold. So we're unlocking the discovery potential and stepping out to a much larger footprint.
For those of our viewers who may not be familiar with that term stepping out to a larger footprint, can you explain what that means, both in terms of, I guess briefly, geology, but also gold value and therefore company value?
So when I first got into the business, there was a very simple idea that was presented to me, which was the best place to find a gold mine or a silver mine is next to an existing gold or silver mine. And so the approach that we have taken is to look at past producing mines. And in the spirit, you're really trying to reawaken some of these past producing mines. And so what I mean by stepping out is where we know there is silver or gold mineralization, taking a drill rig and drilling and testing to see the concentration of the metal outside of where we know. So, it's one thing to step out, a few feet or a few tens of feet, but in some cases, we're stepping out hundreds of feet and we're finding that the mineralization is continuing. So that tells us that we are adding tens of millions of ounces, and it's quite encouraging.
In addition to those drill results that helped to define it more value than people were aware was there before for the company, which is a great thing for potential shareholders, you've also had some new, I guess, recognition of the value. I mentioned Rick Rule earlier and Sprott Asset Management having clients being recommended to take a sharp look at Dolly Varden, but you also have institutional shareholders, and that's usually considered to be a great corroboration and endorsement of a company's value when you have major institutional shareholders picking up significant chunks of the ownership of the company. Can you talk to us about a new institutional shareholder that just came on board?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, we're building a business here, we're building a company, and I just got to say to your viewers, because I don't think I've ever had an interview where I looked this tired, and I just want to let you know. I just want to let you know that I spent Monday, Tuesday in New York, Wednesday in Toronto. I got in very, very, very late last night back into Vancouver, and so I just want to just let your viewers know that we're working really hard to get the word out, to get the story out, and explain the value proposition. And the way I've built this company is I always look at our shareholders as our foundation. And so I've tried to find alignment. I've tried to find people like Eric Sprott or mining companies like Hecla that will enable us to build a business, and bringing in this new large institutional shareholder for 7.5% of the company, which I think that stake today is worth 12 or 13 million dollars, just to put it into context in terms of dollars and cents. But I think that it's an endorsement, it's a validation that the smartest minds in precious metals investing and mining have done their due diligence. They've looked at this project, and it checks boxes based on location, size, grade, and such.
And beyond the recognition of the current value of the company and the prospects that you continue to basically discover and define for those existing shareholders and potential shareholders, there's also a question that was submitted by a viewer about your vision of the future of the company. First, I'll read the specific question and then try to restate it in ways that are maybe more general. Fricandel Special says, will you sell your company or start mining yourself? And if you start mining in the future, will you pay a dividend? And if there's a dollar collapse, will you pay a dividend with silver-backed paper? So, in a nutshell, what is your vision for where you're taking Dolly Varden, and what are the doors that are open to the future growth of the company that potential shareholders should be mindful of?
So I think it's important to look at where we were and what the original vision was when I took over the company. So going back to February of 2020, my strategy was there are mining companies that are depleting their mineral inventory. So if we could source through discovery, through acquisition, if we could build up silver ounces in the ground, in the future, we could sell the project, the company, to a larger entity, and they could develop it. So the vision was always to sell the business and to allow a company that had multiple operating mines, that had the expertise in terms of development teams, production teams, to move forward with the asset. And I think how we've demonstrated that it was the right strategy is from our original. If we go back to February of 2020, if we look at a few metrics like market capitalization, our market cap has grown from a $20 million company. We're valued at just under $200 million today. Our share price, at different times it's been up, 800%, but where it is today, it's up, well over 300%, and that's sustained. And this is all on the back of our mineral inventory growing. So that going back to, we started with 44 million ounces. Today we have 63 million ounces and 1 million ounces of gold. So if we report as a silver equivalent, it's about 140 million ounces of silver. So we've added essentially 100 million ounces. So the one thing I would say to any new viewers, if you look at 2020 to get an idea of why you should own silver equities, Dolly Varden was a company that went from 16 cents a share to $1.17 when the price of silver moved from $15 to $30 in the summer of 2020. Today, the company has added, almost 100 million ounces of silver to the company, and today we're trading at 84 cents a share. So, and the reason for that is because the silver price is lower today than when it was in August of 2020. So if the silver price continues on this trajectory, it's up about 30% since August. I would expect that Dolly Varden, like we've already seen our shares more than appreciate by 100% since the September low. And this is evidence that the leverage that you get in silver equities outperforms silver itself.
One more question I'd like to ask was submitted by a viewer, and it really may be controversial, so I respect that it's not going to be an easy one necessarily to answer, but it's of high interest to our both potential investors. Bill M. from Florida says, will ESG end any hope for profitable precious metals mining in the future as it is doing now for coal? So again, there's been a lot of talk about the virtues of ESG approach to business, but there's a lot of skepticism on the part of some investors saying they wonder if how much of this is just political correctness and people saying what they have to say in a current business environment rather than how much of that is actually good for business and how much of it may not be. Can you give us your view? And maybe it's a nuanced view. Maybe there's different elements and aspects of that you think are essential and others that are not necessarily going to drive better business results. So which ones are you focused on?
That is a very, very complicated subject matter because, and I want to approach this in so many different ways. I look at you and I look at the way you run your life and your business and the morals and the values that you hold. And I think that for so many of us, the defined principles of ESG are just how we do things anyways. And I just think that, when you reference then coal and how that's impacted companies like for example, a large mining company like Teck, and how that's impacted funds, I think, like anything in life, you have like the swinging pendulum of we went from, there are some bad actors out there that weren't respectful to the environment, that weren't respectful to local communities, that weren't respectful to governance. And I think for those companies, it is important to get them as good stewards, good business stewards, whether it's stewards of capital, stewards of the land, but I think we've probably swung too far on the other side where we've gone, and the term gets thrown around, where we've gone over, being too woke, right? And so I think, there's probably somewhere in the middle where, and again, for me, ESG is just a fancy, we used to call it sustainability when I first came into the business, right? So there's different ways this has been expressed over time, but it's not a new concept, right? Like all these ideas have been around for decades and decades and decades and decades. And, I was running a gold mining company in the 2000s, and, we actually had a lot of green funds. Today they're called ESG funds, but back then in the 2000s they were green funds, and they were attracted to my company because we could use gravity, and we didn't have to use some of the nasty chemicals to extract the gold from the rock. So we were bought by green funds, and so look, I think it's a complicated question. We could probably spend hours on it, but at the end of the day, it is something that we have to be aware of, because there are investors that want to see companies adhere to these ESG scorecards and these ESG annual reports. And but I think for us, it's just the way we operate anyways. Like, we've got tremendous relations with the local communities. We've got tremendous relations with the government. We try to strive to run our business in a way where we're modeled after, and so high governance standards. But I think it is a complicated question, and there's a lot of layers to it, a lot of nuances. But at the end of the day, to answer the question, I think we've gone from, there were some actors that were not adhering to these principles. Now we've swung all the way to where, and I think what the great example was, and whether it's something as simple as, like, look at where going too far on that ESG pendulum got us. And we kind of threw that out as we were looking for returns and gains. And I think, for any investors who stayed away from coal, which was one of the best performing commodities recently, or oil, or some of these commodities that get necessarily a bad rep. The other thing I'd say to anybody who's trying to go too far on this perceived clean alternative, whether it's the EV train, the battery metals train, to build out all this infrastructure, we're going to need a lot of mining. And so I think it's there's the conceptual ideas, and then there's reality. And I think reality tells us that we've got to take a balanced approach to all this stuff.
Yeah, that's something that we've talked about on several interviews in the past, and I think it's something that needs to be clarified for people who embrace the idea of a clean energy future, who want sustainability, that sort of thing, and environmental responsibility. Nothing wrong with that, but where all the material is going to come from to make that happen, and where there's a disconnect, where there's a reality disconnect between sort of that narrative of, we can just by policy say that we're going to be doing all these clean things, but we're not going to do any of the activities that are necessary to get the materials that are required to do those. Can you talk to us briefly about the hard facts around that, as far as the likelihood of a metals shortage increasing in the future if we do pursue these mandated goals and don't at the same time simultaneously invest in exploration, development, and mining of the materials necessary to achieve those goals?
I just don't put a lot of weight into a politician that comes out with an arbitrary date and says we are going to stop doing this by this date, but has no idea of how we're going to get there. It's a great soundbite. We live in this soundbite world where everything is reduced to so many characters or so many seconds. And I think that the reality is it's not achievable. Us in the mining industry, we can strive towards it. We can be very thoughtful on what projects we develop and which ones we leave for the future and which ones we probably won't develop. But I think ultimately, having these politicians tell us how and when, and we're gonna get there without consulting experts is not realistic. And I think there's going to be a strong snapback against that. And but ultimately, I support all this. Like, look, and I think we got to go case by case. You go to a place like Santiago, Chile, for instance. That's a city where everybody should be using an EV, and they'll reduce air pollution, and let's build out a grid there. I think we need to look at these. But you go to California, where they're already having challenges with their grid and with power, and in a hot climate, running air conditioning systems. Everybody and using an EV to build up that infrastructure. It's going to take time to get there, and I think that doing it over the next 6 or 7 years is unrealistic.
We also wanted to ask you one last question, and that is for potential investors who want to get a foot into owning companies that are involved in the precious metals and metals space that are going to be essential going forward. What is it that they need to know that differentiates Dolly Varden from other companies that may be in the same arena that should get them to take a closer look at Dolly Varden? What makes Dolly Varden special in your eyes?
I think it's three things. It's the size of the project. It's in terms of the number of ounces we've identified and the potential for growth. So it's size. It's the grade, the concentration of metal is quite high. So it's a large project. It's a high grade project. But I think the last and most important is location. And I think the fact that not only are we located in a historic mining camp where people are accustomed to mining activities for the last 100 years and are planning mining activities for the next 100 years. It's in a country that's got a long, stable tradition. So in Canada, so size meets grade in a safe location. Those are the differentiators. It's actually the only project of its kind that has this much silver and this much gold in North America. So it is truly a unique company, and I'm very fortunate that I've got all these tremendous scientists that have unlocked the discovery potential, and they're making me look really good right now because it's been a very enjoyable experience. And the company's doing very well, and we're growing, and I see our prospects are good, and we're being very well received, and there's a lot of it's been a very good experience.
The other thing you didn't mention that occurs to me is, again, starting from that, how I found out about Dolly Varden, which was that you're within the circle of trust that Rick Rule and his Sprott asset manager compatriots that he's worked with for his whole career are having studied it open-eyed, recommending to people, but also having met you and your team in person at the recent Rule Investment Symposium, gave me corroboration of the impression about yourself as an honest individual, that sort of thing, that you have a sense about people when you meet them, and to see that you're within Rick's circle of trust and of his investment company that he used to be CEO of, as well as having met you in person. I think our audience has talked with me about that principle, why it's important to them to know that they can trust someone they're going to be in business with, essentially, and I think that that's a differentiator as well, that in addition to this project-specific ones. So grateful for your presence here. For people who do want to find out more about Dolly Varden, I know we'll put some basic company information in the description of this video, but your suggestions to people on how they can stay informed.
Again, I'd love to provide you with a phone number, an email address, a website address, social media handles, and we love talking to people about not only Dolly Varden, but about other mining companies, about silver, about life. So and I just think everything you just said about me, and I appreciate it. It goes right back to you. I had an opportunity to meet your family and spend time with you, and I think and this sounds very simple, but I think the good guys kind of hang out together, right? And I think that so it's a pleasure to get to know you and the opportunity to get in front of your viewers. We're grateful for.
Well, it is a pretty close-knit community here. The same several hundred, up to 1,000 or more, appear in the live chats that we have associated with our premieres that we release every evening. Now it's going to be Monday through Saturday going forward. But anyway, they support each other, both as investors, as in people who are trying to take care of their family, people who are trying to be proactive and see what's coming and position themselves accordingly. And Dolly Varden's part of that. So Shawn KhunKhun, CEO of Dolly Varden, thanks for joining us here on Liberty and Finance. And folks, look in the description of this video and you'll find out more about how to get a hold of Dolly Varden for more information. And make sure you go to libertyandfinance.com, put in your name and email address if you haven't already, and click submit. You'll get a confirming email, and you need to confirm that. But once you do, you'll get one email from us per day with our latest interviews, whether it's with Shawn or any of our other industry-specific guests. and helping everyone stay aware and prepared. And we're just grateful, Shawn, for your presence here with us on Liberty and Finance.
Thank you.